republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Any changes to the agenda?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, you received a revised agenda after the agenda was sent out. There have been no revisions to the revised agenda.
Motion to approve the revised agenda.
Motion by Councilmember Burt, second by Councilmember Zimmerman. All in favor? Aye. Agenda is adopted. Presentations. We have an oath of office, and Chief Brady, you want to start?
Thank you, Mayor. Steve, please step on up. Council, today part of this is called a badge pinning ceremony. I'm going to introduce you to our newest member of the police department, Steve Hotelli. Steve was born and raised in St. Paul Park, Minnesota. He's been married to his wife Amanda, who's here for 10 years, and they have a daughter, Maya, who's 6, who's here, the cutest thing in the room by far. They currently live in Cottage Grove. Steve has worked in the security industry under various roles for the last 17 years, including time as a supervisor in that profession. For the last 4 years, he has served as a security officer at the state capitol under the Minnesota State Patrol. He is committed to public service in a huge way. He's dedicated 9 years of his life to serving the Cottage Grove Police Department as a police reserve officer. There he does functions as a police reserve, transports, patrols, all volunteering his time completely during that 9 years. On his spare time, Steve enjoys spending time with his family at their cabin in Wisconsin, enjoys running and watching football. I like that one the best. Steve is very excited to be joining the Elko New Market Police Department as it fulfills his goal to protect and serve a community as a police officer. Steve has earned this badge that I'm about to pin on him. He was a candidate that was chosen after 3 complete hiring processes of not finding anyone that met our standards. As part of that hiring process, he's passed an extensive background by an investigator that took several months. He passed a medical screen, a physically demanding job coordination test that is not easy and has knocked out candidates before, and a comprehensive psychological evaluation. Steve has been counseled by me in the importance that this badge and what it represents. He acknowledges the huge responsibility to this community that goes along with this badge. So, it is with great pleasure that I pin this on our newest candidate, Steve Hotelli. Now that he has the badge, I turn it over to our esteemed mayor, Joe Julius, for the swearing in. Renee.
All right. I state your name.
I, Steve O'Callaghan,
Do solemnly swear to uphold the Constitution,
do solemnly swear to uphold the Constitution,
laws and ordinances,
laws and ordinances,
and faithfully perform my duties as a police officer.
and faithfully perform my duties as a police officer,
Never betray my badge
never betray my badge
or the public trust.
or the public trust,
Have the courage to and will
have the courage to and will
hold myself and others accountable,
hold myself and others accountable,
promote the vision and mission of the department,
promote the vision and mission of the department,
provide fair and impartial law enforcement,
provide fair and impartial law enforcement,
practice community values-based policing,
practice community value-based policing,
serve with pride,
serve with pride,
integrity, and excellence,
integrity, and excellence,
and provide quality service
and provide quality service
to the best of my ability, so help me God.
to the best of my ability, so help me God.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead. Please approach the podium, state your name and address for the record.
I'm Guy Bosch, I live at 9362 Glenboro Drive, and I've been a resident of Elko, New Market for 15 or 16 years. So, thanks for letting me speak tonight. I wanted to talk about water real briefly. I'm fully aware that the new water treatment plant raised...
Can I, go
So
ahead.
I'm fully aware that the city water plant raised the rates of the city water cost. I did a little research, and it seems like most jurisdictions around us or in the country run on a tier system based on the volume that you use. A tier system of tier 1 to tier 2 or tier 3, and they're usually up to 20,000 gallons for the first tier, and then the price goes up for the second tier, up to 40,000 gallons, and then up to 40,000 and plus for the third tier. The cost of national averages in around Elko, New Market, and other cities is about $1.30 to about $2 for 1,000 gallons of water. Elko is, and I have some cities that I punched up. Elko, New Market has the lowest volume at the first tier of $3.51 per 1,000 gallons. Tier 2 is 10,000 to 20,000 gallons, which is usually the tier 1 in the other communities, and that's at $10.17. Tier 3 is over 20,000 gallons, and that's at $20.33 per 1,000 gallons. So why do I care? My basement toilet had the flapper stick, and my water bill is $515. My water bill is usually $115. If your flapper gets stuck on your toilet in Farmington, this bill would have been $51. So the short tier structure and being 10 to 20 times the price in other communities, took my water bill to $515. I called the city, they said there's an unintended water form you can fill out. That would have dropped it to $100. So having the flapper stick on my toilet, I'm spending more this month on water than most communities of family of four spend in an entire year. I don't know why the 20,000 gallons has to go to $20 a gallon. That is unheard of anywhere in this country. It's fiscally irresponsible for the residents to do that. If I don't pay the bill, I'm assuming I'll get a lien on my house. If it's $20,000 or $20 per 20,000 gallons, or if that's an unlimited amount, you can make it anything you want. I just don't know how that figure was derived.
Okay. Anyone have any questions for Mr. Bosch? Tom, do you have any comments?
So I was going to suggest that you contact the city with regards to unintentional use policy.
did.
Yeah, we have a policy in place just for the benefit of other people in the room and people who might be watching this after. If you have a good payment history, which means you've had no late payments in the previous year, and you have an accidental use, you have a broken pipe, the neighbor kid comes over and turns out your outside spigot when you weren't looking, leaky flapper on a toilet, which surprisingly is one of the greatest culprits of unintended usage. You have the ability, and what that does is it takes that usage month and potentially into the next usage month, I believe includes the 2 months in which it might have occurred, and it reduces it back so the rates don't exceed the tier 2 rate, which would be up to 20,000 gallons. With regards to the aggressiveness of the rate, Mr. Bosch is correct. We have one of the most aggressive rates out there with regards to how that is. It's intended to discourage usage beyond the base levels. That is the intent. The council always has the ability, if they want to reduce that, they certainly can, but that's the result of a policy discussion we had several years ago with regards to the current rate structure that occurred at the time that we implemented the rate structure following the construction of the plant. The aggressiveness is not related to the plant itself, but to the general philosophy of discouraging usage.
So,
If I can talk about that, I researched other utilities around the country and around the state. I did not find one, and I found the top 10 usage rates in the country, and the highest rate is $9 at their highest tier. So the philosophy that Elko and Mark is establishing to diminish the more use is 5 to 10 times more than any single city in the country.
I
You
can't,
are standing alone.
I can't respond to rates across the entire country.
I have it right here.
So-
But still, it's, I don't think anyone's doubting,
Right.
but, is it fair for me to assume that you explored getting the credit and it was effectively $100?
So,
right?
so the credit takes you to tier 2, which is $10 per 1,000 gallons, which is, Farmington, their tier 2 is $2.40. Our tier 2 is $10. So if it takes my unintended use to tier 2, it drops my water bill from $515 to $415.
Okay,
If this would have happened in Farmington without any paperwork, my bill would have been $51.
so so the credit, the process we currently have in place really would have just knocked $100 off your bill, and
Right,
that's
and
essentially
my-
what.
Yeah, my bill's been the same for 15 years, never missed a payment, never had anything. So now I check every toilet and my water meter before I go to bed. Because I think if I had 2 toilets running, my bill would have been $1,000.
Yeah, well, I think today, unless other council members want to weigh in, and I'm not sure what the timeline is that we determine our water rates for the upcoming year. It's later in the summer, isn't it?
Yes, as part of the budgeting process, usually between October and November, in that
Okay.
window, we'll be coming back with our annual rate analysis, which takes a look at our current rate structure, makes recommendations for future rate structures. If the council can always do it before, but that's the time at which we're looking for feedback from the council if they're looking to make changes to our rate structure and what the implications would be related to the financial health of the utility funds.
So if we as a council wanted to explore this particular, our credit policy, and if we wanted to make changes to it, it would probably be along that same time? Is that?
If the council's looking to make changes to the unintentional use policy,
Yes.
I don't know that that would have to wait to the overall discussion of the rate structure. I think the frequency with which we see requests under that policy and the volumes relative to the total business within the utility funds, that's an item that could be held as a free,
We could
Stay.
take that up at any point.
you could take that up at any point.
I was hoping when I called the city that they would have a policy that if you've been a good standing member paying your bill on time, that you might get one get out of unintended use free card every 10 years or something like that. If it happens more than once, then you're personally responsible for your use of your water. But accidents happen, and to come home to a $515 water bill and know that to change it $100, knowing that it was unintentional, I would like the city to maybe talk about some kind of one-time unintended pipe breakage kind of free pass.
So, to the rest of the council, is taking a look at this at a future meeting something that you'd be open to taking a look at? So I don't know that we're gonna have a resolution for you today, but I think I'm hearing that it's a discussion we're happy to have and re-examine it.
Yeah.
So,
I'll pay the water bill. Wasn't so much about the money, but it is, but it's more about
fair enough.
just that sticker shock, and I don't think it's good business for Elko to be so far
Yeah.
from the standard.
I appreciate you bringing it to our attention.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else here for public comment? Once, twice, public comment's closed. Consent agenda. Anyone have any items on the consent agenda they'd like to discuss or have pulled?
I had questions about letter J, so I don't know if it's a poll thing or just ask a couple questions. It's about the pulling or for the bond stuff and the multiple projects. I was just curious if it sets us up with the amounts, where we get the amounts. So like if we're looking at 1.4 million for the roundabout, 1.6 million for the police station, are we capped if we go down this path right now and approve this? If we find out it's gonna cost way more, or it's way under, or?
Yep, so stepping back, the purpose of the resolution is it allows us to pay for hard expenses, so actual construction, hard expenses, not including your soft costs like engineering, architecture, other consulting work in advance. Allows you to reimburse yourself after you've issued the bonds. So let's say we want to try and line up the timing of the financing for the roundabout project along with the financing that, let's say, we might do for the on-site generation project. The on-site generation project, for whatever circumstances, we want to get it done earlier and start it before that financing gets done because of the timing of two projects, split the difference so we can bundle it to achieve efficiencies either.
Well, I appreciate
better,
that
yeah.
piece, it's just where the numbers come from.
So we can't reimburse ourselves in excess of whatever's in the resolution. So we took whatever the current budget number was, and we put a healthy contingency on top of that. That number is not you authorizing the budget for it. It's not saying that's what we think it's going to be. We just wanted to make sure the number was high enough in the resolution that if circumstances got to the point where we're reimbursing ourselves up to the full amount of the project, we weren't shortcut in any way. And in most of these cases, I don't know that we would be reimbursing ourselves. This is just one of those cover yourself type of actions that you take just in case, depending on the timing of the financing.
Is that satisfying?
Sure.
Okay. We can
No,
put it
no,
on.
I don't need, it's gonna
Okay.
be the same discussion, so, yeah, motion to approve the consent agenda.
Motion by Councilmember Berg, second by Councilmember Schwitzenberg. Oh, I'm gonna get it right one of these days. All in favor? Aye. I mean, how close was I? All right. I'll keep working. All right, no public hearings, so on to general business. First item, sewer trunk fee credit policy.
This is an item that has been before the council previously. Earlier this year, the council had received a sewer hookup request from the Lucas family for their property on Cersei's Avenue. They had requested that the council reduce the sewer hookup fees commensurate with the now expired joint sewer board credit policy. That policy had taken into account two things: the idea of incentivizing people to get off on-site systems onto the city's municipal system for long-term public health reasons. And then the other part of it was that at some point in the past, for certain properties in Elko, it's been given to understand that the payment of the initial installation of the sewer system was in part paid for off of general property taxes. And so the idea was to credit those properties back for that contribution through their property taxes at that time. The council at that time had discussed it. There was consensus that a credit would be appropriate, and had directed staff to prepare a policy that would provide the credit. That was presented in its draft form to the council at the last meeting. They directed some changes to the policy itself, moving it from a set dollar amount, which could be amended over time, to a percentage, which I think was a good idea. It makes it easier to administer. But the council still had yet to decide and reach consensus on what the amount of the credit would be in this case, now the percentage. So what the council has before it is the revised policy that reflects the direction that was given. We'd be looking for the council to identify the percentage amount to insert into the draft, into the policy, and then ask the council to adopt the policy.
So kind of picking up where we left off last meeting.
Who wants to start talking first?
Josh, you give me a look, so
Oh,
you have
no,
something
I'm
to say.
looking at Kate, she wasn't here, so I was gonna let her.
So really what the issue is what's the appropriate credit, assuming we want to give a credit, right? And I think I saw in the staff memo, there was expected, it could be potentially 14 properties. Does that sound right?
Yeah, there's roughly around a dozen properties that would be impacted on this based on the criteria when we took a look at.
There's some, depends how you look, I think it's more like 5, so there's a, yeah, those would be eligible, but maybe not as likely, so.
Yeah,
There's not that many.
There's the practical aspect and the ones that would technically be eligible under the policy. The reality is, from an impact to the sewer fund and the dollars that we're talking about, I don't think it's gonna have a material impact on the fund. The number and the frequency with which they're likely to come through is far enough apart that these are gonna be occasional things on the radar. So I don't know that the decision on that is a question of whether or not we can absorb it within the fund. I think it's a question of what's fair and appropriate.
So first, do we all feel that we should do something?
Sure.
Well, I
But it doesn't matter, if 4 people think we should, then let's move forward and we'll move past that. I've had a couple chances to try to say that it wasn't, so I'm beyond that.
I mean, say it again, because
I mean, I just think it's hard to put a number on it, I just think we're pulling numbers out of the air to appease one person that's asked about it, and we're making a broad thing. I don't think whatever number we pick is, we're making it up as we go. And that's why I don't think we should do anything at this point.
so there's really no, okay.
I mean, there's no basis behind 50%, 75%, 100%. We're really making it up to say we help someone or some people.
Okay. Does that change anyone else's feelings on this?
Nope.
Okay. Does anyone have any thoughts on what an appropriate credit should be, percentage-wise?
I'll stick with what I said in the past. I think it should be 50% of the fee.
Okay, 50%. Don, Kate,
That's what I was thinking, was 50%.
Josh, if we went 50%? And Josh, part of the reason I wanted you to talk again is because I think I've reread this memo about 15 times, and I kind of start coming back around closer to where you're coming from on it. At the end of the day, we did tell residents when they were here, we were gonna address this, and we had good rationale and good decisions, or a good discussion about it, so. Yeah, I have no logic to dispute 50%. I don't think any of us do, but it sounds reasonable. I mean, and we're talking 50% of the $4,056 fee, correct?
Correct.
Correct.
It'd be 50% of the trunk fee.
Right. So I'd be along with that. So,
What we'd be looking for is a motion to pass resolution 1922 with a 50% credit.
and
Motion to approve resolution 1922 with a 50% credit.
motion by Councilmember Timmerman,
Second.
second by Councilmember Seepersod. Any further discussion before we vote? All right, all in favor? Aye.
Right.
All opposed?
No.
Okay, motion passes 4-1. All right. All right, general business item B, approve plans and specs and authorizing ad for bids on the 2019 streets rehab project.
In your packet, you noted the cover memo and plans. I did not include the specification book. It's about an inch thick. This is basically the plans for bidding for the 2019 mill and overlay. So we'd be edge milling along curbs on selected streets and then doing a thin overlay along with some associated work, some very selective curb repairs where Corey felt that the curbs posed a hazard to the equipment or crews, or something that he thought he'd be fixing in the very near future because it's in poor enough condition, so we included that. And then adjusting catch basins and manholes, and then some repairs to some streets on Glenboro, some dips, but that's going to be an isolated repair that's not actually in the overlay project, but pretty severe bumps over some culverts. And then finally, the parking in downtown Elko, the plans do include perpendicular parking, assuming we'll be able to come to terms with the bars on voluntary assessments for a portion of that cost. If not, we would just reduce the quantities and, at the council's direction, go with parallel parking or some other option. But So we have the flexibility to change that within the plans. I included a breakdown of the different work items, estimated quantities, an estimate of unit prices based on sort of averages from some different projects that were bid this spring, resulting in an overall project cost, as you see in the chart, of I think 600 and some thousand. I don't have it in front of me, but a portion of that would be recovered from special assessments, but the rest would be a city cost, primarily covering the collector roads and then 60% of the local roads. So I would stand for any questions.
Anyone have any questions?
I have one, I mean, I know we're going out for bids, and bids is, I mean, what we get back from bids is likely gonna dictate what the cost of this work is gonna be, or at least a portion of this.
It would dictate the cost of the work. It doesn't necessarily dictate the cost of the assessments. You could choose to hold
Correct.
the number that's been given, or we do have the latitude to adjust it, so.
With the changes that you had just mentioned, that you anticipate, I mean, what kind of cost differential would you anticipate?
Not really. I think that in the spreadsheet that I gave you, they maybe went up on the order of $100.
Is that all it was?
But again, that's based on the assumed bid price is kind of an average of something that's fairly high versus what we had initially used. So really, until we get the bids, it's hard to predict that. Just do the best we can based on what's come in the door so far this year. One thing we do is try to give a pretty generous schedule. So when I finish up the schedule in the bid documents, we'll give them a fairly broad window so they have time, but we may tell them, once you start, you have 8 weeks or something like that, so they don't come and go and come and go. They wouldn't do that anyway, but just to get it done in a timely manner, but with latitude to do it when it fits their schedule so that they don't have to add a premium to do it. Hopefully that'll help attract better bids.
Okay. Oh, and similar topic, but last time I think we discussed this, there was one of the local bar owners was here, gave somewhat of a presentation, but was asking for us to re-examine the assessments for those commercial properties. Has any further discussion been had with?
We, after discussing, I think Tom and I generally concurred with his sentiments.
Okay.
And are drafting assessment agreements for their review along those lines.
Okay. Does anyone have any other questions for Rich? Does anyone?
Motion to approve resolution 19-28.
Motion by Councilmember Byrd. Second by Councilmember Timmerman. Any further discussion before we vote? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, unanimously passes. Next item. Item C, 2020 County Road 2 and 91 intersection roundabout project.
So I'd like to let Darren take this over, but I wanted to introduce him. I don't think you've met Derek Ahrens yet. He's a design engineer at Traffic Department. He will be doing the final design and walking you through the 2 items tonight related to approving the preliminary layout and then hopefully approving the proposal to move ahead with final design. And I'm especially pleased to introduce Derek because he's an Elko New Market resident, so I never want to let that get past anybody.
Cool. It's got skin in the game as well.
Yes.
A little extra.
You're gonna hear about it if you screw it up.
We'll know what house to send them to, apparently.
Yeah, well, I won't bring that one up.
State your address.
Yeah, for the record, yeah.
Okay, yeah, so I wanted to discuss this roundabout project here, give an update on what we've done over the past year here. Project purpose of this project is to address safety, reduce delays, and plan for the future growth of the city. that this intersection is gonna see the additional traffic volumes. Right now, we're at the point now where we have a plan. We've gone through the conceptual and preliminary design, made some decisions on what the lane configurations are gonna be, and now we're entering the final design to prepare plans for construction. For project cost of this project, 2.4 million is the base cost of just the roundabout section. That includes design fees and construction costs. The city applied for the HSIP funds, which is the 1.79 mil, and then they have their match and the remaining cost, which and for the base cost of the roundabout, that's $607,000. And then kind of the two proposed optional items were the trail connections outside of the roundabout and the continuous lighting that would go from the intersection to downtown. With this, there has been discussion in regards to how much additional cost would be for a resident of Elko, New Market. I guess an easy formula is about every $100,000 of city costs would be about $6 of tax increase. So for just the roundabout section, that's $36 a year, and then $48 for if we did the trail and the lighting. Break that down, the trails would be $18 a year, and then lighting would be $30.
That's for the typical home that you've heard Tom talk about on an annual basis.
And that's based on a 15-year bond even at today's rates?
Yeah, well, it's
15 years, 5%.
Yep.
15 years, 5%.
So we'll look at what has been decided for the actual layout design. So the design and the lane configurations of the roundabout were based on the current and future traffic volumes. And we also try to salvage as much infrastructure that's out there today, because there is good pavement sections out there. In addition to the Bolton and Mink traffic forecasting, we had discussions between the city and county too, and comparing to the county's overall model and any other potential influence on the roundabout design. Ultimately, the design is this single lane configuration, but it will have the capabilities of becoming a multi-lane fairly easy, where it's moving the split islands back, etc. It's just accommodating for future multi-lane, which traffic numbers would be like in 20 years. I guess other aspects of the project, again, to try to save costs, there was agreement between the city and the county that was fairly involved to stripe off the outside lane on the west leg versus removing that completely. And that is for, if you're coming out of downtown, it goes to 2, and then here in the single lane, you go back to 1. So it's just keeping drivers in the same lane all the way up to the roundabout. The south leg, that design will accommodate a future 3/4 intersection, which is a left turn into that property on the southeast corner. So 3/4 intersection is essentially if I'm coming out of that property in the southeast corner, I cannot take a left. I would have to take a right and then do the U-turn in the roundabout. We also, our design also is cognitive of future designs, such as a right turn lane in the northbound direction on the south leg too, for that 3/4 access, and just placing the trail where we can accommodate that future right turn lane there. And then there will be no north access from that property due to the free right turn and the possible merging of traffic there heading eastbound. During this, or with our draft review, there was a peer review of the roundabout completed by another consulting firm. From that, there was no major comments out of that influenced the overall design, but there was some minor comments on entry angles, lane widths that were incorporated. So the optional designs outside of the base roundabout design were the trails. So you got the two trails. The one is on the south leg, making that connection from Aaron Drive to County Road 2, Casatu, and then the one from France to the County 2 Natchez intersection. This will make critical connections for the city's trail system, and it actually directs pedestrians to the safest roadway crossing, which will be at the roundabout where you got slow speeds. It's not mid-block at a 55-mile-an-hour speed like it is today at, say, Aaron Drive or France Avenue. And then that the second additional scope or second additional item outside of the base roundabout is the continuous lighting. We're proposing that we can take the lighting all the way through downtown, which would make this roundabout feel as kind of the entry gateway into the city. So what you see here, the red circles are a must for the roundabout design for safety, but then the yellow and the orange would be, I guess, the optional design of that. The orange today are, or the downtown area are already accommodating for installing the streetlights already. And the yellows will be all brand new poles and locations. So if you want to pull up the layout there, Rich.
Oh, it's a different,
It's in the PDF folder. So we're just going to pull up the layout here, which was essentially the final deliverable of our concept design contract, which shows all the lane configurations, the trails. Yeah, that one. Or that one.
Right here?
Yep.
it's coming, it's big, so it's gonna take a little bit to load. And this is my fault, I asked Derek to make sure he showed you the actual deliverable for the preliminary design phase.
We were gonna blame you anyway.
Yeah, and now I don't know how to get it up on the screen.
Yeah, it looked like it was in the packet for you guys in there.
It's screwed up everything else because it's so.
So big. Yep, exactly.
Can I ask a question while you might be looking for
Yep,
stuff?
sure.
Just to clarify, so the continuous lighting, I think it was orange, that you had that's the lighting that's 255,000, correct? Does that sound ballpark accurate?
That's correct.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and if we decided that that was something that we wanted to cut, I mean, does that? I don't know, I guess what I'm trying to ask is, what, if we decided 10 years from now that we wanted to do that, I mean, with lighting, does that typically go up at the typical rates of inflation as everything else, or is that?
It's about as safe as assumption as you.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And when we had earlier discussions on it, you recall that that's one of the items where we don't know that we pay a premium for them to come back and do later, the lighting aspect, because the nature of the contractors and the quantities, it's its own unique thing. So if you wanted to cut it with the idea that you might come back and do it later, you could do it, but you wouldn't necessarily pay a premium of not having that project, but you would be looking at
Right.
increased costs over
Inflation.
time. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's the opportunity where maybe we look at taking this design further, 95, 100% design, look at the overall construction cost. If the overall construction cost is too high, we could take it out of the contract. Or there may be an opportunity to do an alternative bid, where in the contractor's bid, you would say, okay, this is the overall project, and then an option that we may do lighting if it comes in cheap.
Well, and I guess I would just push on this one to say, I mean, these two things are ones that I think, I'll speak for myself, that I really wanted to see in there. And if I were to ever rebuild my house again or rebuild a house, I mean, I would do things so much different. I'd add the damn deck, I'd finish the things, and I wouldn't be so, not cheap, but I would think about those must-haves now versus, otherwise we're gonna wipe something out and then we're never gonna come back and add it. And it's just, that's what I get concerned about.
I have one more.
Derek?
Yep, Derek, yep.
So a lot of times, like Derek said, when you do bid packages, do it as an alternative. When they give you the cost inclusive, if it comes in way over bid, we can then talk about removing it then. I mean, that's the smart way to do it. Let them do their design, let them keep it in there. And if it does get pulled, the design's already done, so they can just, at some other time, we can go back and have it bid again. But, I mean, do it as an alternative bid, and then we can pull it and out if we want, or not.
Just for the record, I haven't said we should pull it, but
I was just getting on the record that I didn't want to pull.
I know. It's just a clarifying question.
I was unable to figure out how to get that to show, I could get it here but not there, so unless somebody really wants to see it, I'm gonna give up.
No, I just have a question. You know, so there's that, as you're coming out of downtown, there's that extra piece. Now, that's just striping. That's not like adding like a curb or anything in the middle there.
So it's a lane that exists that we're gonna mark so that
People can either,
people stay out of it.
yeah. And,
It'll be kind of cross-hatched to yeah.
and so according to that too, so are we changing the speed limit? Because is it 55 right there? I don't think it gets
We cannot
50.
change the speed limit unless we build this. I would think you'd build it, and if you were concerned about speeds, do a study.
Well, and I guess my point is, I don't think it turns 55 until past the library. And on the diagram, it just has 55 much closer to downtown, like
It's
way
45 up
before
to
the
the
vets.
45 at the
Because
vet,
it's almost like by
before
the baseball
vet,
field,
and
it
then
says
right at
55.
the apartment complex, it turns 55. It's like the shortest speed zone I've ever seen.
Yeah.
It goes from 30 to 45 to 55.
Right.
And
And it's just on the diagram, it shows it.
That was a result of a speed study done by MnDOT, so, yeah, there's really little. I would predict, I don't know, Aaron, if you have, or Derek, if you have comments on this, but I would think that between marking out that lane that you see in blue and the upcoming roundabout and the curvilinear alignments even approaching it, I would think you'd see speeds slower.
That's why I'm
Oh, yeah.
surprised. I mean, 55 just seems way too fast. I mean, it's way faster than it is there.
55
I was gonna say, you're going up a
it's
hill.
going grade, so if you're stuck behind a truck,
Yeah.
semi, anything, you're lucky to get to 30 by the time it gets up to
Well, even
speed.
going the other way, you're probably gonna slow down too. Because you're doing 55 until,
Well, the other way is gonna
or you're
remain
gonna
two
slow down to
lanes, right?
35 going through there.
The other way, what?
Coming into town's gonna go down to one as well, from the
Correct.
roundabout?
Yep, yeah.
Yeah,
Right
so-
now, we have it, again, just to save some infrastructure, is to have merged the two lanes immediately right here. So yeah, today it does go down to one right here, so, but you would have the opportunity to bring two cars in the through movement through the roundabout.
And then it go down to one as you're coming in town, just like it does now.
Yep, exactly.
Which, you're right, does slow it down.
So the discussions we had at staff level and informally at county staff is that once the project's done, we would recommend to the council to request a speed study. Now, Rich, would that have to go through the county because it's a county road, or can we do it as the jurisdiction because it's within our jurisdiction?
I think even if you could do it, you wouldn't, you'd work through the county.
I have a question, and this is just on the budgeting, and this is probably standard, but I gotta ask anyway. So we're paying a 3% administrative fee to Scott County for administering the project when they're not really administering the project?
Well, they'll be doing a fair amount of work. They'll be doing the construction staking, all of the inspection.
Oh, they will be.
Testing.
So I thought it was kind of our baby after the grant was done and,
No,
They pulled rank.
determined they would do that construction, those construction services. We would be
Okay.
responsible for services. We'll get into this in the proposal, but,
oh, okay.
so yeah, they've got, I think it's about 80 grand worth of.
84,000.
Yeah.
So they'd be doing, the bid, they would be handling all the bidding. They'd be handling all the disbursements related to the project. They would be doing all the grant administration, related to the project. They'd be doing a lot of the backroom items.
Is that is that, in the opinion of staff, is that an equivalent cost that? Tom's gonna yell at me if you don't come up.
Bolton and Mink had initially submitted a proposal that included much of that work. And then we learned that Scott County wanted to administer that. So their bid was substantially reduced, basically equivalent. So we feel it's fair.
So it's a fair deal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Move to the proposal.
I'm thinking that we'd like to go ahead and approve the preliminary layout before we move ahead to the next item. That's
Correct. So at this point, what we really need from the council as part of approving the layout is we need the council to make decisions on the might as wells. Are we gonna do lighting, both one or, both pieces or one of the pieces? And are we gonna do the trails? Those are items that we need decisions on, before we move into, directing scope work to be done.
Do you need that done in the form of a motion?
I would recommend that it be done in the form of a motion. I think we need a formal decision on that.
Any discussion before anyone wants to motion?
Again, I would say that we include it as part of the design, but not have it bid separately.
The trails and the lighting.
Yep.
Is that a motion?
I'll make a motion to include the trails and the lighting as part of the design, but have them bid separately as alternatives.
Okay. Any seconds?
Motion by Councilmember Schwichtenberg, second by Councilmember Seepersod. Any further discussion before we vote?
And staff thinks that's good? Or what's thought?
I'm a little bit concerned about the trails. If you change the scope of one contractor's work too much, and he's afraid he may not get one part that's attractive to him, it might mess with his bid on the other part.
I think there's also the question of intent. We're gonna be back at the next meeting asking the council to make payments related to the acquisition of permanent and temporary easements. So if you really aren't serious about doing it, we should know, because we're gonna start spending some money related to it.
I think it makes sense for the lighting. That's a pretty much standalone subcontractor. But the trails is right down the alley of the guy building the roundabout. I would think that might, and it's a fairly significant piece of work.
Yeah, and it has a lot of work types that's associated with the roundabout, and so you have earthwork, that's dependent on the roundabout.
I can't imagine a better time to build those trails. Really.
But lighting, yes, that's its own unique thing. It can be done later without paying the same type of premium would be coming back doing the dirt and pavement kind of stuff. That would be an item I would say, yes, we could do as a bid for Part A and Part B, one being the continuous lighting, one being the downtown lighting.
In my knowledge of construction, if you got two different contractors that win the separate bids, couldn't that pose a ton of problems for the coordination of the construction?
I mean that it would be within the same contract, but an item that we could choose to include or not.
You pick one contractor to do it
Oh, when
all.
you said separate bids, I thought people would be able to just bid for the trail work or just bid for the,
They're
oh, all right.
alternative bids.
All right.
Yeah, it's just an item on the bottom of that contract.
So in summary, what was motioned sounds acceptable to staff, or am I not understanding that?
They're saying that the trail shouldn't be, so I'll amend my motion to accept the design to go forward with the lighting to be bid, the lighting outside of the roundabout to be bid as an alternative bid.
Okay, motion by Schwichtenberg, seconded by Seepersod. Any more discussion?
All in favor? Aye. Unanimous, motion passes.
So moving on to the final design proposal that Bolton Mink has put together, just want to go down some tasks that will be completed in our design fee. The project management, help and support, right-of-way acquisition, city council presentations, and then just PMT meetings, working with the federal aid office at MnDOT, and coordinating with the county also. Utility coordination, especially working with the private utilities, making sure that we're letting them, or getting them the proper documents and stuff so they can relocate out of our product area. Cost estimates, again, getting those cost estimates every plan set submittal, so then the city can have the ability to look at what is the cost at that particular time. Right now, the county has recommended to have this project be closed or constructed under closure.
Yeah, I think it's much stronger than recommended. It'll be built, not open to traffic.
The decision's been made.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, in regards to that decision, it makes it a little easier, but we still, well, again, because it's a federal project, we do need to look at what's the impacts to the surrounding area, mainly on the detour. So that'd be impacts to, say, the 35 ramp, that more cars would be taking the left, because right now the proposed detour would be 46 to 86. And then we'd be looking at what's the local impacts, how many cars can we anticipate possibly cutting through residential areas to still get through the city. Then another task, coordinating permits, MPDS permits, WMO permits, etc. And like I said, similar to the project management, supporting right-of-way acquisition, creating some right-of-way figures for that, and then construction support, where the county would be admitting that and the testing, but then we would be kind of an on-call service. They need files, have questions, we'll be there. And final design, we're anticipating a 125, 150 page plan set, and everything that needs to be included for a roundabout, or to have a roundabout constructed, signing turf, etc. And then we'll be completing all the federal aid DCP forms, so the city can have their HSIP funds. Next one.
So Rich, maybe before we get into this, did you kind of describe for the council what is not included within this particular scope as it might relate to you or staff for this project?
So the way we tried to look, and we did this on the past phases too, think of my position as staff. So no matter who the design consultant is, I'd be doing certain things, furnishing them information about the city's infrastructure, interpreting the local conditions in a way that might help them make better decisions, coordinating with staff on certain things because of my knowledge of the city. We do have a separate project manager for the team that's responsible for the prosecution of this work. And so imagine that they're one of my competitors and I'd be serving, so that I'm not included in much of these figures. That's a separate project manager. If that is
So
what you're
some of
looking
the
for.
things that Rich would be helping on is developing mitigative strategies to impacts of traffic, cut through traffic, things like that. That's not part of the design scope. That's something that we would work on, maybe working with me, Renee, Corey, and Steve.
They tend to be tasks that aren't defined up front. The things that come up during construction or design that staff asks me, opinion or to help with, or that type of thing. So if that makes sense to you.
Any budget impact on that change in role?
There will be undoubtedly things that come up, coordinating some right-of-way figures, because I know the players, I know the background. So I'm asked to step in here and there, would be an example on the past phases. On this one, I would predict it would be mostly in how do we manage impacts on local roads, whether it's, what kind of things can we do as a city to help discourage trucks, or to provide more information to residents about how much speeding is actually happening, that type of thing. The design itself, I would expect to have a minimal role, other than I've already been pushing Derek. I know there's 2 feet of sand under that road that was built less than 10 years ago. Let's make sure we're not squandering that. Let's make sure we're not unnecessarily digging trenches across this thing that'll vastly change the scope because of the impacts to that existing subgrade. So stuff like that, but it doesn't add up to a lot of time. So.
Okay.
I have a couple questions. So if we're building this without, through traffic, why are we doing the staging plan?
So the staging plan, we want to just look at, so we have a basis on maybe why we are siding with the county in the full closure. Just looking at just having some basis on our overall decision to siding with the county, but then some of that would be, like I said, the traffic management control plan of what are the impacts of that detour.
There'll be things like, how do you get to Fish Rock? And we'll need to provide probably some signage so that they're not shut out, because the detours will be out at the county roads. So some of that, but I think it's primarily detour.
Detour related, and there is, we'd have to talk maybe with the county of, is there an opportunity for us to, the contract to accelerate that roundabout, get that open, and maybe possibly construct the trails with, under traffic to try to maybe limit that closure time.
Yeah.
So there's some of that aspect. Maybe we close a lane for a certain duration where they construct the trail, maybe do some pond work, et cetera, and then get that full closure and hit the main items of the roundabout.
So even within the concept of full closure, there may be opportunities to get it open sooner, or portions of it
Yep.
open sooner.
Yep, yeah.
But it's ultimately not our decision, correct?
Well, it's not, and I guess that's my question, is why would we even question the county if the county is demanding that it's fully closed?
Well, I think what you just described does make some sense to me. There's going to be trail work, lighting work. I mean, what does full closure mean? It certainly makes sense that while you're building the roundabout itself, but are you going to close that whole thing for associated work without at least considering the alternatives? Because that's going to be painful.
Yeah, and the county statement that we're looking at full closure wasn't defined in that level of detail. Their intent is that generally during the construction of the roundabout itself, they wouldn't be trying to maintain.
You're not trying to do one side at a time, stuff like that. That's what they're getting.
These are just detailed, level of detail and discussions that haven't been held yet.
It sounds like from John's question, we're almost paying for duplication of services.
Yep. No, I don't think that's the intent. We're not going to push
No,
back.
I'm not saying you are.
But if we can improve it without, I don't imagine what kind of item, dollar amount we had for that.
It's almost $100. I mean, I could see that it, would be somewhat worse for coordination and stuff, but to me, that's just my opinion. I think that's well over. The other question are the construction services. So what, if the county's doing all of the staking and everything, why are we doing as-bills when the county should be doing as-bills?
We did confirm that the county's cooperative agreement now says, it did say testing, so that could come out, that 15 grand. That agreement's not executed yet, but, I have no problem approving without that. I don't know about the staging, if you want us to not look at anything further to try and accelerate any openings, I guess we could pull that back some degree, but.
So the thing we have to keep in mind, Rich, correct me if I'm wrong, but the proposal's up to and not to exceed.
That's
So
true.
there's aspects of the work, so as proposal was being developed, we're still working through elements of the cooperative agreement, so there are elements of this that were based on preliminary discussions or assumptions we had with regards to the roles between us and the county. So for instance, just on the staging or the staking aspect of it, if they're not spending that time, this isn't a lump sum, we don't have to pay for those hours. If it only takes 45 hours, hypothetically, just pulling a number out of the air, to complete that aspect of the work, we're not paying for the additional 55 hours worth of time.
Yeah, and this project's a little bit unique compared to maybe other county roundabouts where they don't have the trails aspect. I mean, the county likes the full closure just because they can get her done in a certain time frame. Here, like I said, with these trails, you can fully construct these trails without possibly closing the road or impacting the operations of the intersection today. So the full closure would be just to construct the roundabout itself. So like I said, it may be looking at opportunities of can you construct the trails, and then like I said, maybe delay or limit the amount of closure time of this intersection. Because yeah, we could close this intersection and then the contractor gets on site, or we can allow the contractor to be on site, accomplish some work, you know, under traffic with the intersection operating as it is today, and then close it.
And I can see, you know, like I say, I can see having the hours in there to do it if necessary, but I guess I would like to see that reported back to, at least to staff, you know, whether that coordination with the county first, and then if there is a need for doing a staging plan, then, you know, before you actually go and do a staging plan.
Sure.
Without that. And then same thing with the construction services. I mean, honestly, I just don't want to see duplicated efforts or efforts that the county should be doing and we're doing when they should be doing it. So.
Yeah, I think much of this was written before we ever saw the cooperative agreement. So there's that overlap, but the testing definitely could come out the way I read the cooperative agreement. And if it gets executed without that, then at least we've had this conversation and you know what the expectation was.
Okay.
Any more?
Well, yeah, I guess just finalize a few slides. Well, yeah, so going over the project schedule, we're looking at completing the design all the way up to January. Right now it's the plan to have all the right-of-way acquired, and then we go out to bid in February, which would be you'd be one towards the front end of projects being let for bid. So hopefully get better prices at that time.
We had talked about an accelerated schedule at one point. Is that opportunity gone, or is it still possible that we might look at November, December bidding if the stars align?
We did lose a couple months here where we did talk about accelerating to November. We may have to have some conversations with the federal aid office with MnDOT on how fast can we accelerate this thing. It might depend on the right-of-way acquisition, because you cannot advertise this project without right-of-way acquired too. So
That's a constraint. There's certain review periods that we have no control over when these go in, if I understand it right.
that's true too. Yeah. So we do have you have to have 60 and 95% plans to MnDOT federal aid, and they'll review the plans at that time. They do have 28 days to review each one of those plans. They say minimum 7, max 28, depending on how busy they are at the time. This is a pretty standard schedule for a lot of design plan sets, so you know they're going to be looking at other projects at the same time, is my guess. We aren't, like I said, we'll be more on the front end of things, so we'll get a jump on other projects that the federal aid office would receive. Like I said, I'd say on average, most projects probably go out to bid March, April, so we're probably about 2 months ahead of most projects right now.
Okay.
Derek, question for you.
Mm-hmm.
For the federal aid, do we have to have right of way acquired by the time we get to 60% of plans being submitted?
No, you need to have the right of way acquired, by the time you want to advertise the project. That's the stipulation there. 60% is usually when you define your right of way needs. Here, we did do it, with this layout.
Randy Browning, right-of-way agent for Scott County, and a project management team meeting made it, I'm not expert in that timing in that process, but he certainly made it sound like we needed to have the right-of-way acquired far in advance of that.
Of the, before advertising? Typically, because you do, again, it might depend on how busy that federal aid office is, they do have the right-of-way agent that needs to review all your legal documents, parcel sketches, etc. A way to accelerate that would be, say we get a signature for a particular property owner in September, send that document to federal aid, then they can get that approved, instead of handing everything all at once when you want it approved. That could maybe accelerate things. And right away probably has the most risk and timeline delay, so that's why I think where Randy comes from, because he has a lot of experience.
And that Ray and I are trying to decide if we're going to make a recommendation to the council on condemnation on a certain parcel at this moment, so that's the reason for the question.
Any more to the presentation?
Yeah, I guess just the detailed staff and hour breakdown, which is in your packets. I guess you just go to the last one, Rich, where just wanted to point out the 15,000 at the bottom there. That's what, that would be for the construction materials testing, where when we received the co-op agreement, that's where we're reading that, that should be taken out, and Scott County would take those costs on.
Yeah, so 175,990 instead of 190,990.
Okay, so at this point, we need to decide if we're taking anything out, or is that, or, I'm not sure if you need a motion
Well, what I
from
heard
us
in
on
the
something.
preliminary design approval is that you want
Yeah.
to proceed with the design of all
Right.
those features, but possibly bid it to make that decision later. So
Yep.
that wouldn't change our numbers at all.
Okay. So what do you, I'm not sure what you need from us, if you need a motion or just direction, or,
I think a motion accepting the proposal and basically authorizing us to proceed.
okay?
So moved.
Motion by Councilmember Berg, second by Councilmember Timmerman. Any further discussion before we vote? All in favor? Aye. All right. Motion passes. Thank you. Okay. General business item D, discussion regarding the regulation of mobile food units.
All right, so the council directed staff at the last meeting to do a little bit more research, specifically in how other cities regulate mobile food units in association with events. So in your packet, you will see a full table of area cities and their regulations regarding events. And then I also, just because there was discussion regarding the operations of mobile food units and streets and public rights of way, I also went ahead and did that. So you can pretty much see that for the most part, it's almost a 50-50 split, and whether the city regulates or does not. However, regarding the regulation of public streets and rights of ways, if they do allow them in the public rights of way, there is often a stipulation. So like the city has like permission or must require permission. Only certain streets or specific areas are allowed, or in just like dedicated parking spaces as well. And then regarding the events, there was less stipulations, so they either regulated it or they didn't. None of the cities that I talked to had any really issues or concerns either way. And then the other issue, I guess just in responding to questions regarding events. So the entity that would have approval regarding the language about a mobile food unit isn't allowed within this area unless authorized by the organization or the event organizer. So that language would refer specifically to the permit holder of the event. So in association with Fire Rescue Days, the umbrella entity is the CCEC, but within Fire Rescue Days, there are individual or smaller events in which different entities could also hold a permit. So in that instance, it really depends on who is inviting the food truck and where they would be operating in regards to who would have the final approval.
So for example, the CCEC pulls the event permit for the parade, the events at Wagner Park, the Boy Scout breakfast, there's items that are included underneath that, but double wide, they're pulling an event permit for their wrestling and stuff, and Josh could decide to have a food truck come in as part of that, potentially. And so again, whoever pulls the permit, if it's part of their event, they're making the decision about whether or not they want it as part of the event.
And so with that example, going back to something we approved in the consent agenda earlier with the CCEC pulling the bigger event for the pancake breakfast and the church thing. So if I, as the Cub Scout, wanted to have a food truck there following my pancake breakfast from 7 to 12, but the church didn't want it, it's ultimately up to the CCEC to decide then for the two of us.
Within the scope of their, and that's for the people who are participating in the permit to work out amongst themselves. I think the idea is you think of it as you have one entity, they can decide whether or not they want food trucks as part of their event and how it impacts them and their event. Now, those events also come through the city council, and you can choose to allow them or not. Now, if you're denying it, you would want to have a really good reason why it wouldn't be a good idea. There's a nuisance aspect to it or something else. But we're putting it back to the permit holder to say, hey, yeah, we're the CCEC, and we're going to, as part of in the park event, we're going to invite in 5 different food trucks to enhance the event. And we separately worked out some sort of business deal with it, but they're covered underneath our permit. They'll still have to get licensed, but they'll be permitted within that geography during those dates because they're within an event permit.
The other big piece that I would just like to mention, in addition to the discussion about the regulation in regards to events and whether or not they should be allowed to operate in the public streets or rights of way, is just the discussion of a license. There has still been not consensus from the council regarding whether we should require one, and if we do, what that fee should be. So really those are the big topics, but as always, we are open to feedback on the entire ordinance.
Thank you, Haley. All right, council. What do you guys think? Josh, John, you guys want to just duke it out?
Well, I mean, we can talk about the event thing later. I mean, I think what I still struggle with is it's on page 3, part B, it's in the locations, so subpart C, whatever that is, mobile food units may only operate along public streets or public right-of-ways when authorized by the city as part of an outdoor concert or event pursuant to blah, blah, blah. So they're never allowed on a public right-of-way or public street any other time if there's no event going on. That's the way I read it, right? Even if it's approved by the city, because there's no concert or event going on to tie it to.
Correct.
So then I guess my question is, why wouldn't we allow them to park in a neighborhood and on a public street when I can park my truck and trailer on the street that blocks the same road, sites, and prevents pedestrian? I mean, I think that seems odd to me that we wouldn't allow a truck of the same size or smaller perhaps than something that's already allowed to be parked on our public streets. So I just would question that one, I guess, that it has to be tied to a city.
They're a lot louder, they make a lot more smell, they leave a lot of garbage around.
But they're not going to be doing that if they're complying with the noise ordinance and they're picking up their trash and they're complying with everything and we can actually enforce it now. it should be a non-issue, assuming we can enforce it. And
Well, where it stems from, it's not necessarily the truck, it's the 30 cars that pull up to buy tacos. They're oftentimes the one that cause the issues, the speeding in and out, the tossing their trash. You know, the truck can have the receptacles, but you can't make the, say, 15 to 20 customers throw the trash in there. And it's always, I think it's a big difference is because you're conducting business in a residential as opposed to just you parking your truck there, you stop, you turn it off, you go inside. There's a lot of ancillary effects to that truck parking there. And I think when we initially talked about this, you kind of respected the right of the homeowner, the quality of life of that business coming in and operating on just any public street. And I think that's why you initially limited it to private property, because you can control what goes on the private property. Because
the unfortunate thing though, if it's on a private property, then we can't have a community gathering of sorts, because I can't then be catering it for my neighbor, or I would have to cater it for my neighbors, essentially, and they have to park in my driveway. Even if I wanted them to park right in front of my house along the back corner or whatever, then I wouldn't have that ability to do so, or the way I think it reads right now.
No.
I'm gonna agree with Scott, or with,
Josh?
Josh, sorry. And the reason that I'm gonna agree with it is because we allow ice cream trucks who are extremely loud, playing this obnoxious music.
Get the kids running everywhere.
Kids are running all over the streets, causing more hazard than any amount of vehicles that are gonna come up and park. And so, I guess I'll play the devil's advocate to what the chief said, and we already have that. We have it every day.
Big difference. What does the ice cream truck do? It leaves 2 minutes later and goes to the next block. You're talking possibly 3-4 hours of that loud, obnoxious conduct in front of, in one spot.
The ice cream truck is all over the entire city in a night.
But the nuisance impact is a matter of 30 seconds, a couple minutes at tops.
That's, I think, why we don't get complaints is, yeah, it's loud, but then it goes away.
You should see us running around the house trying to close the damn windows so the kids don't hear.
Yeah, right. Headphones.
Turn the TV
So,
up.
but I'm not making recommendation, I'm just saying that's in my experience with that, food trucks, and that's the big difference is, it's not just one evening either. If they do hot business, they might be there every night for the next 21 days, the regulation.
Let's limit them then to park next to parks, on the street, park next to non-residential homes.
I guess I would say, if we get to that problem, that means we have a demand and that our residents are loving the fact that we have this other business in town as well. So, I mean, that's a different problem, potentially a good problem. We're bringing services to them. And if it becomes a nuisance or something, then we can revisit this, but I think to just outright ban it or not allow it, I mean, would be silly at this point if we haven't had any issues or whatever.
Now, I do, for one, think that they need to stay away from, if they go park next to the firehouse and they're selling tacos out of their truck.
Not on Tuesdays.
I mean, that's a different story. So let's limit.
But how do you create that
That's
separation?
why-
So we limit.
How is the nuisance impact to Firehouse any different to Don's house?
So
The nature-
Let's limit them to where they can be,
So,
right?
That was the thought of private property.
So a couple questions. Is it possible that if they want to park on a public street, they can apply for a permit for it, or is that just a hard no?
So with regards to the public street, the way the council directed us to structure the ordinance is we set a box that they work within, and either you're working within the box or you're not. Now, with regards to Josh's comment about you want to have a neighborhood event, Haley, if there is a road closure associated with, let's say, a block party, which is not uncommon, and they applied for an event permit associated with that, would they be able to have a food truck?
They would,
Yeah.
correct? Okay.
That was one of the things we specifically discussed as staff.
And then can we add in language that they have to be 300 feet away from other food serving establishments in a brick and mortar building or something to that effect?
Can we do that?
I'm sorry, say that again, I was reading the ordinance.
Can we put buffer zones around brick and mortar food serving establishments?
Yes.
Oh, you can.
You can,
Sure.
okay? And I'm assuming we could do the same thing same thing as it relates to like fire rescue days. You have to be 300 feet away from the concessions at fire rescue days or something. Is that something that could be doable?
Well, isn't there a thing in here that they would have to be,
I think there is.
the only way they would be able to be allowed to
Yeah.
come to fire rescue days is if the CC.
If they were
EC
invited.
We
Right.
talked about
That was-
distance versus geography. We feel geography is a heck of a lot easier to both clarity to the vendor and also from an enforcement standpoint, given the type of geography that's within
Okay.
for that one specifically.
So, just kind of thinking back to our conversation a couple weeks ago, there's some strong philosophical differences on this. I guess, don't need to elaborate any further into that, but is it practical that if we pass an ordinance or something, we can pass it with a time expiration date, or we have to revisit it in the future? That's not practical?
Well, we can revisit it next month if that's still.
Yeah, you can choose to revisit at any point. It's just a direction that we would like to, we would like 1 year from now for staff to bring this back. That's just a direction. We can bring the topic back.
So it is a practical thing we could do?
As a practical thing, you can.
That's what I was asking, okay. So, why don't we find a few things we can agree on and approach it that way? So, what are the major issues that we still need to debate that we're far apart on? Because
I still have an issue with the fire review. I think that it shouldn't be in that mapped area, I think it should be in the community period.
It should not.
Shouldn't be allowed in the community during those 3 days, during those 4 days, whatever it is, and without the approval of the event coordinator.
So if there was a buffer from that event, would that do anything for you?
No, because it's still competing with those nonprofits. I still have a major problem with that.
Okay. Don, Josh, Kate, where are you guys?
I'm in the middle here,
Okay.
Josh and John, about the fire rescue days, but I think I'm more lenient on it just because I'm on that committee and going to the meetings, I think I can say fairly enough that we wouldn't be opposed to saying, nope, absolutely not, no food trucks. We would just want one that sold fried chicken, which should be fine.
Yeah,
So I'm confident enough in knowing that the committee would be fine with having food truck, just not trying to compete with the foods that we have there.
That was kind of the message I had heard
Mhm.
too, and I had poked around.
Kate?
As I'm reading through this, I would agree with, I agree with both John and Dawn, but I feel that if there is a food truck that is coming into town for a special event like Fire Rescue Days, I feel that part of their money that they're taking in should be donated back to the city.
Which we can't legislate.
I know, but that's
Okay.
just, I'm just
No, I know.
splurring at the mouth here.
But the event coordinator can.
But,
So if we leave it up to the event coordinator to allow one in the city during their event, during those days, they can, if they can go to them and say,
We can ask.
I'll give you 20% if you let me come in.
Yeah.
I mean,
So that would be something you'd acquiesce to if the event coordinator had the control.
yeah, I think we leave it, I like the language the way it is.
Mhm.
I just say we remove the map and say the whole community, period. That's my opinion.
The whole community period specific for the rescue days.
Fire rescue days.
Okay.
Are we at any risk of liability if the community organizer discriminates against one truck versus another truck, and we're giving them that power to pick and choose who they want when they want?
No.
No, it's their event, so any of that would fall on them.
I mean, and I'm gonna shoot myself here in the foot, that, get rid of the map, because I would just park on the north side of 2 on Todd Street, super duper close to downtown. If this is the way it lays out right now, there's an easy loophole to park really close, so, I mean, if we're,
Except they wouldn't be able to park on Park Street because it's a public street.
well, and we're not, I mean, I think we need to revisit that
Yeah.
part of it, to allow that.
Yeah, so depending on whether we include the residential restriction,
Yeah, I disagree respectfully, John. I think if, we're gonna have an event like Fire Rescue Days, and if we're gonna, we're talking out of both sides of our mouths to some extent, not saying you are, but I mean, we as a city are. We wanna encourage business to come here, and the biggest event that we have, even though it is put on by nonprofits, we just say absolutely not. I'm all for buffers or restrictions, I'm all for, even giving event coordinators the power to dictate what can and cannot be sold. I would not be okay with just striking them out altogether during that period of time.
I say during that period of time, we just give the event coordinator power.
That's what I'm saying, yeah. And if they then choose to say, no, we just don't want any food trucks at all, I can respect that, and I think we're being fair to everybody involved. That's just my opinion.
I'm okay with that.
Josh?
I pick and choose my battles, so I'm not gonna win this one.
You
We'll
never
move on to
know.
part B, whatever the other one.
Can we make the buffer area bigger then? Would you agree to that?
What would you have in mind?
Well, like Jack said, if you look at the map, I mean, there's a loophole. I mean, you can literally,
I'm looking
if
at,
you get the permit to do it, you can park within several blocks.
so, look, Arden Hills, 300 feet from an event, Brainerd, 300 feet from an event, Elk River, 500 feet from an event. I mean, those are numbers that seem reasonable to me, depending on,
500 feet is a city block.
So it's kind
Which
of the
city block?
logic that we utilized as we kind of looked at where the events take place today. But there's some of the parks, it's hard to define what's 500 feet, they move around, there's practical issues where you can park, so that's why we decided to just decide within this geography, but there is a judgment call as to where you draw the boundary.
well, and if an event coordinator wants the food truck there, that changes the ballgame.
Then they can get it, yeah.
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 Yeah, I mean, that would work for me.
You're just suggesting, John, that we might want to move the boundaries so that they can't poach is easy.
Right.
Get them away from the event as much as we can, I guess is what I'm saying. I know I'm being extreme saying the whole city, so I'm willing to concede.
Not city, so.
And, you know, maybe it's, you know, 2,000 feet or 1,500 feet or something a little bit bigger. You know, one city block is not much. I mean, if somebody pulls up with a gyro, and I love gyros. Not
You'll
that I-
walk that block, right?
Yeah, you're gonna walk a block to get it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's 500 feet, so.
What's hard for my officers to enforce is the feet ones, you know, are we gonna buy them all digital range finders or whatever to
No, it goes
coordinate
streets.
that? So that's why a map is nice for an officer to have and go, you're
I'm just-
inside of it or you're outside.
It's also nice that, you know, it could be potentially included with the because we issue the permit annually. So when we're giving it to them, one of the pieces of information is, oh, one of the restrictions is during these dates, you can't do business within this box. Unless you are approved as part of a separate event permit.
I like that.
And if you want to, call this person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're changing the boundaries of the geography. So is there consensus that the geographic-based approach during fire rescue days is the direction that the majority of the council wants to go, and that the geography is okay?
That would be my,
I've put up on the screen a roughly 1,000-foot radius from the event location, which is from about the event to City Hall in one dimension. So that would be, that green area would be 1,000 feet from the event.
and I would push more for the 300 to 500 feet. I mean, realistically, if we're saying you gotta park at City Hall for an event at Fire Rescue Days,
You might as well not even.
we're saying you just shouldn't come
Yeah.
here.
people come and go in cars still that are driving by.
It's true.
Well, and keep in mind that County Road 2 is a county road. I don't know that they could go there without an obstruction permit. Plus, we have part of the, unless they're in a parking stall, I don't know how that would work, what they're.
No, this would be, for instance, parking, it's like Josh was suggesting, if we allowed them on residential streets, I'd go park on Todd Street, right there at the edge of the area. If not, I would go to the first single, the first house.
Well,
Yeah,
we
except that we
can't,
prohibit.
can't, because that's catered only.
Yeah, so some of the things that are in place in the other parts would provide some of the practical barriers to that, and be intentional. So it's philosophically where you're coming from.
And again, we're not, the reality is it's not like we have food trucks driving around all the time. So, whatever we decide today isn't gonna be permanent. That's why I suggested we pick a time a year from now or 2 years, whatever it is, to revisit this
Well,
ordinance.
revisit
and
it
that's where I
this
guess
time every year.
I would suggest we go as loose as possible to allow or to encourage actual food trucks from even considering us. Otherwise, a year from now, we're gonna not have anybody because they potentially just self-selected out and said it's not worth it. Versus going as loose as possible, we allow for a license, yep, they have to, they pop into City Hall, they have the permit, we make sure that they have the health department stuff, they are compliant with everything else, and let's see how it goes. And then if we need to get stricter, I would suggest we go, least restrictive to most restrictive and go that path versus, because we're not gonna.
I actually agree with you, but I don't know that we're gonna get consensus on that. I want some form of consensus.
We only need one more person.
I know, and then we could go that route. But I'd like to have
We
as
could
much consensus as
reevaluate
we
it in a
can.
year.
Exactly.
I will consent to that.
So to what part, where do we have?
To make it a little looser this time, and if we have to pull on the strings, pull on the strings.
So
They
by
still have
looser-
to go ahead and get their $25 permit, they still have to prove that they have their health inspection stuff done, and
Yeah, so let me throw something out that suggests the size of the box and see if I get nods when I do it.
Oh, God.
Basic permit, well, changes from what you see in front of you. We would keep the restrictions based on geography as written related to fire rescue days, but we would eliminate the restrictions on them prowling residential. I don't mean negative connotation, but them being able to operate and parking where they can legally park within residential areas. Is that what I'm hearing from the council? A majority of the council.
Say that
repeat the
again.
last one.
Yeah.
So
Just
the way the current draft is they can't be in residential areas unless
Right.
they're doing it in a catering situation and parked on private property.
Right.
What I kind of gleaned from the conversation was that loosening making the box bigger would allow them to be able to park on public streets and residential areas. They wouldn't have to be there as a caterer, they wouldn't have to park on private property, they could just plop down in front of in Josh's neighborhood and just set up shop, as long as they're legally parked and operate.
And would you, Kate, agree, and I don't know where your head's at,
Different way.
to remove the fire rescue days perimeter and allow them there and see if we have any issues?
That one
Because they're not gonna be parking on 2 anyway, because it's a county road.
I think that if we can keep the writing in there that they have to be invited by CCEC to be inside this box.
Yes.
Anything outside the box, I'm okay with, as long as it's not on Old Town Road, I'm fine.
So what this would mean is with expanding the box with regards to residential areas, you could park on Todd Street.
Just not to do.
You're a little bit further, there's a natural buffering then that's created between them and where the nonprofits are conducting what they're doing.
Can we add one block more on that, in that box? Around
So
it?
you wanna go on the other side of 2? Is that what you're talking about?
Just here. So they don't park right there.
Yeah.
John?
So you basically would add one block north of Main, one block,
I'm okay with that.
so in each of those quadrants, go one more block.
I'm fine. So let me ask a quick question. So they decided to park on Aaron Drive right across the street from my house, and I had my grandchildren over for the afternoon, and they're making a heck of a lot of noise. I'm still allowed to go out there and ask them to move, right? Because,
If they're making money, they would say no.
so I have no rights as a human homeowner in Elko New Market with the way that this is written to be able to ask them to move.
No
No,
different
the
than
way
me
it's
parking
written.
across from your house with a cooler, or doing whatever's appropriate. And within the nuisance ordinances and whatever, that I could do the same thing, right? I mean, it'd be
With
treated
one,
no
with
differently.
one exception. If they're parked in front of your house, their window can't be on the road, their window's gotta be on your curb. And if there are people trespassing on your property, to get to their unit,
I was just gonna say, there's all these different ordinances. Okay, you have to park within 12 inches of the curb, right? That's a statute, that's an ordinance, okay? They would have to walk on your property to use the truck, like he said, but if they just turn around the other way, there's no law that says which way they have to operate, they could just operate in the street. So then people are standing in the street,
Which is not
blocking
safe.
the roadway. If they're causing too much noise at 9 o'clock at night, I can shut them down for the noise ordinance. Like I said, there is other ordinances, and I did wanna offer with, if you go loose, in 1 year from now, I can set in our records management, food truck violation, and I can look it up in a year and see how many food truck violations. If you wanna do nothing, I can do how many food truck calls we have in the next year, and you can evaluate it then. Whatever you wanna do, I can bring you factual numbers, how many calls we responded to for food truck violations.
I like that.
You can go on that, but there are other creative ways using other ordinances to say, stop business and get out of town. It's just, it's hard because it's each officer's opinion.
But some of the nuisance elements that we just talked about are the reasons why we didn't want them operating on the street, wanted them operating on commercial properties where you have parking lots where they can park the vehicles, people can stand and do business with it without obstructing the street, or creating as much of a safety issue, that it's generally commercial areas which are buffered based on the potential nuisance aspects of it from residential properties and in commercial areas where there's similar potential activities occurring. So staff's approach, and we did on that operating, that's staff's recommendation, based on our collective experience with food trucks, or what we would expect related to nuisance calls associated with it, to be proactive with regards to heading off what would likely be calls. But again, you can always take the approach, and we have in the past many times, that we'll start with a bigger box and restrict it. We just feel that, based on our experience, on this one, we might want to just start with a little bit smaller box with regards to the operation of the residential districts.
Believe it or not, I think I agree with Josh that we give them a little bit more leeway, see what kind of traffic we get actually coming in to town. Who knows, maybe in a year we won't see anything. I like the fact that Brady can go ahead and put something out there and track it, how many calls you get in the next year, and bring it back to us this time next year, and then we reevaluate and see where we're at. I know, it's hard to believe that I actually am agreeing that we go a little looser on this food truck thing, but
I was actually just gonna say the same thing, but fire rescue days,
So,
that's all.
fire rescue days. We need to come to a consensus on fire rescue days.
Just have it approved, just have them go through the event coordinator, as simple as that.
Fine with me. Josh?
That's
John?
simple, John?
Fire rescue days has the ability to say no.
Yeah.
I agree, I just like to see the box a little bigger.
We can always adjust the size of the box if it becomes problematic, or shrink it. Likewise, I mean, we can look and see what sort of feedback we get from both the collective, the community as a whole, the general public, and from event coordinators within the event, and make tweaks in the future as well.
I'll concede to that.
So we have some consensus? You don't need a motion though, right?
I do have one question, just the way that Tom
Come on.
was framing the Holy Grail.
You made so much progress here.
I know, just one minor thing, because just the way Tom was framing it was on residential districts or residential streets only, and I just want to make sure that is what you guys all feel and support.
Can they, but you're saying also commercial, can they?
Right,
Yeah.
that's my question.
I hear you guys just saying, they're okay running on the roads.
As long as
Doesn't
there's a
matter
place
where.
for me to park as a person in my car.
I'm not okay with them in my parking lot at the restaurant.
But that's private
Okay.
property, you
Then
can
I'm-
ask them to leave.
Whoever you want from.
But
and
they
I'll
could
enforce
back
that.
out of the parking lot and park immediately across the street.
And
at
then
their
we give them
entrance.
hell and they don't come back
See.
to our town. I mean, honestly, they're gonna be in the business, I think, of wanting to.
They're
make
gonna
sure
want
that-
to make certain
Right.
that they're not making anybody mad.
It's tough because this is a brand new thing. So, I mean, we really have no track record. We're doing the best we can with the information in front. I think we came to, I mean, we did a good job of taking every opinion we could and factoring it in, but.
So to clarify, the language related to fire rescue days, for right now, everybody's okay with that? Okay. Restrictions on operations on road, as long as they're legally parked, et cetera, we're okay with that, doesn't matter whether it's residential or commercial. Okay. Was there any other items coming out of last meeting that you needed clear direction on?
Are we good with the $25 license fee?
Yes.
Yeah.
Fine.
Okay.
If we get 50 calls and enforcement's up big time, then we can talk about it.
We'll have data in the back, whatever you guys want to do.
Okay.
Or no data.
Fees are
which
not
is it.
intended to be a moneymaker, they're just intended to cover the cost. And that's our best guess without having any history, so.
And we're assuming $25 is gonna cover our admin costs, not any, I mean, there might be an enforcement here or there, but.
Right now, we would anticipate, if we have a well-written ordinance, and we've set it up because we don't anticipate there would be problems if they follow the ordinance, there would be, but if in the future we have a large number of calls, we would adjust the fee to cover that time to administer it out in the field.
So you have direction and then a resolution will be brought forward next meeting, is that the plan?
Yeah, we'll have a,
Okay.
and that would be on consent agenda.
Okay. All right, let's move on. Woodcrest sanitary sewer, last item in general business.
So we, I think maybe only a couple of you are familiar with what's going on up at Woodcrest. We've got a neighborhood that's largely built on homes with on-site, they call them subsurface treatment systems, commonly referred to as septic systems. And we do have a program in place to, as needed, provide city sewer. Currently, we have 3 homes on city sewer. One's located here, one's here, and one is one of these over here. I don't remember exactly which one. So we have this green branch of force main in place, and we have force main from this cul-de-sac up the back lot line, up and over into the neighboring cul-de-sac in place. The request came here, which would require extending this bit that I'm tracing out with the hand in order to serve that property. We might be able to do it other ways, but the most efficient way for the long term would be to put in where we can also serve other properties. Although the only requester at this time is this. We've estimated that project cost at something around $40,000 to $45,000, somewhere in there. It's hard to say based on 2017 pricing. We would recover, based on the proposed numbers in your packet, about $27,000 of that after we pay Met Council fee and project costs, which means the city would be carrying about $15,000. Assuming he paid it all off, if he paid it over time, it would be more than that, but dwindle down to that $15,000 when he has it paid off over 5 years. He purchased the house knowing that the septic system was flawed, that it would require frequent pumping, and I think he probably priced it accordingly, so my best guess is that he does plan to pay it off once he has that agreement. But we could certainly present the agreement, get him to sign before we spend really any money on it, so we know we at least have a way to assess that to his taxes if he doesn't pay it up front. And so I gave you three options. We could do nothing, we could extend this, which is option 2, or we could do a bigger project. I think it's probably too late this year to pull off a bigger project, and there's really no one else requesting it. So I'm recommending option 2. Tom and I have discussed the carrying cost of around $15,000 and think that that's doable from the sewer fund. So the recommendation tonight would be to move ahead with extending sewer per the request, contingent on him signing an assessment agreement before we make any significant expenditures on design or bidding, and get him hooked up this year.
We talked to any of the other property owners, see if they would be interested.
What we do is we send out a mailing with actually suggested assessment agreements for the force main part. I don't expect any, they'll call us if they need to hook up, I mean, they don't wait. But we do offer, if they want to pay at least the force main share or be assessed for it, that entitles them to a credit when they hook up in the future, no matter when it is. And we did have one person do that on a past project. We would extend that offer again, so they'll know it's coming.
Is that a utility easement through the backyards?
We have a 5-foot perimeter easement on every lot, so we have 10 feet to operate. And this is largely installed by directional drilling, so I think we put most of this in. We only dug a hole here and a hole where we made the connection to his force main. Everything else was drilled.
I won't get calls of people intruding on my property in my backyard or anything.
We send out to the people along, so they'll know
Okay.
what's coming. We notify them.
Is there any benefit to doing the whole thing?
There's certainly economies of scale. I mean, it costs as much to mobilize to do 20 as it does to do 1. And that's what's kind of been making these costs go up, is we're paying $5,000 in mobilization to do a 1 or 2 hookup, where if we did do, all of them, you're gonna have a lot more meat, and you'd probably see lower prices. But the intention when we set this up was that we set a date, I think it was 2021, if there was not an earlier opportunity to do this with another larger project where there's utility work. So we envision perhaps if we end up extending utilities out to I-35, that we might try and lump this in, or at least bid it at the same time for the financing. We wouldn't have the funds in the sewer fund to do this whole thing without bonding, and it's kind of too small to bond on its own.
Could it be wrapped into the bond that we're doing now?
It can.
It could. I don't think we'd be able to get it in this year. It's a much bigger design effort, and to pull it all off with the notification, I think we'd be looking at next year.
And so the thought process was 2 parts. You could roll it into a larger bond, but you'd also be doing similar work. And we just don't have any of that kind of work with those other projects. Even though it's in sewer, and we can include it in the same sewer bond for the on-site generation, that's largely an electrical project. But it would be in that same bond package, because it would be sewer revenue bond. So we could, I mean, if there's a desire to want to get it done, we could, but there would be we wouldn't be getting any economy of scale from a larger project, but we'd be getting the economy of scale of doing the whole thing.
Yeah, and it'd be a minimally like to the current bond that we're going after. I mean,
Correct, relatively speaking.
The other thing
Well,
I'd want
within
to
the
think
sewer fund,
about-
within the sewer fund, the sewer fund bond that we're doing is only about $160,000 for the on-site generation.
In that order of magnitude,
And then the remaining work here, Rich, if we were to do the whole thing.
probably that much.
Yeah.
I don't know if there'd be a lot of resistance from the residents. They were all apprised of the 2021 plan, short of some other opportunities, so maybe it would fly, but it could stir things up.
I just remembering back a couple of years ago when we were having these discussions, it'll stir up a hornet's nest, and there's people that just swear they will never, ever, ever hook up to, whether that's reasonable or not isn't the issue, but I mean, I would support option 2, just from a simplicity standpoint and practical standpoint. Or did I jump the gun? Did you have more?
No,
Did
I think
okay.
that's in a nutshell, yeah.
Okay. Council,
I'll support
I
that.
would be okay with that too.
option 2.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone want to make, do you need a motion for this, or is this
We
direction?
need a motion to authorize scope of work as proposed by the city engineer under option 2.
So moved.
Motion by Councilmember Berg,
Second.
second by Councilmember Schutzenberg. Any further discussion before we vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes 4-0. With Kate, I guess, abstaining. I don't know, what do we do when Kate leaves?
She would have a vote.
Just a 4-0,
No, minutes will
okay.
note that she left, at a particular time, and then she just wouldn't be included in the vote.
Okay.
That was much simpler than intro.
Oh, my God. All right, back to reports. We had skipped engineering because Rich wasn't here, but Rich, do you have anything for engineering?
No.
I was gonna mention to the council that we had received the grant agreement, which we still under review for the Webster Street, tile project.
Water quality improvement.
Water quality improvement project, thank you.
Yes.
Do you want to give them a quick overview, because not all the council people were here last time this topic was discussed with the council?
Yes, I'll try and wing it without an overhead. If you're all familiar with Webster Street going south of town by Coffenberg's, just past Aaron Drive going into the farm, there's a pond and a large wetland. At the bottom of the hill on the left side of the road as you're headed south, that Klein tile, that 15-inch, I call it that, he doesn't own it, but it goes through that property. It's decades and decades old, and we have a grant to replace that tile, and what that would do is restore that wetland hydrology, so you'd have 3-4 feet of water. We could choose the elevation. That'll eliminate a lot of that emergent vegetation, and there will be water quality benefits associated with that, so that's the basis of the grant. In addition to water quality, wildlife, and aesthetic benefits, it takes away a headache for Corey in terms of having to constantly monitor that pipeline for cracks, suck holes, collapses, and going out to repair it. So we think it makes sense. I think it's a 90-10 grant, so the city will have some skin in the game, but the cost, I think we had estimated we could do this for under 100 grand, so you're looking at something in the 10 grand neighborhood. I don't have those details at my fingertips, but that's the gist of it. So that'll be coming back to you in the near future.
A fringe benefit, which was not the motivation for doing the project, this discussion on this project was well in advance of that, but you'd be taking offline water from that wetland getting sucked into that tile line. And if you recall from background that you received in presentations, Mr. Klein talks regularly about suck holes and blowouts and such in that stretch of line. Well, it'd be taken off, the drainage from that wetland would essentially be taken offline from that tile as part of this project. We don't believe there would be any measurable impact on Mr. Klein's situation, but it might make him feel better.
All right, any questions for Rich? We're on MVTA.
That meeting was actually tonight. I did get all the meeting materials, and they're doing all kinds of stuff on their parking ramps as far as maintenance and stuff at their sites. But that was really the big crux of their meeting for today. So.
Okay. I-35.
Just before the last meeting.
Chamber of Commerce. John, you were at the most recent board meeting. Any thoughts or takeaways?
Yeah, so being new, I've never been there. They asked me to talk about myself and, why I'm a council member and what I want to do and some of the things that we've been looking at for development and that kind of stuff. I mean, they're pretty proactive as a group. I mean, they're doing a lot, and, you know, it's, for such a small town, I mean, it's pretty impressive, so.
And they work hard.
All right, I don't know if there's any other chamber updates.
Is anybody
Josh,
going golfing?
I think I'm going with the bank. Why, do you wanna go? I mean, I'll skip out on the bank if you wanna put a team
I've
together.
actually tossed around sponsoring polls. Which would give me,
do that too, but I have 3 closings that day, which sounds.
which would give me 2 golfers, so if you're interested in going.
I'd definitely be interested in golfing, taking a day off work.
If we were gonna put together a council team, let me know, cause I can find, there's other people at my bank that can go.
Okay,
I'd have to pay my way,
yes,
is what you're saying.
you would have to pay the base value of that.
Yes.
If you're sponsoring it through your work
No,
as an individual?
I'm sponsoring it as a councilman.
Oh, how does that work?
Well, sponsoring as
You'd be sponsoring as a citizen,
a citizen.
Does it, is
Yeah.
that a,
Yes.
but he still would have to pay for himself.
because
A citizen
Oh,
can't
yeah.
buy me
It'd still be
around.
a gift.
How about this, Josh? How about we
We
split
can
it?
talk about it offline.
That's
Yeah.
a good offline
Do that.
conversation. All right, any discussion by council?
I'd like to throw out an item for discussion for council, if I could, Mr. Mayor.
Please.
At the next council meeting, we, at this point, are looking at having 3 council people, Joe, Kate, and Josh, because of conflicts that both John and Dawn have. Dawn is available as a last resort, as a backup, in case we aren't gonna have a quorum to get business done. But there are items that are going to be, circumstances allow me to have batted a few things away, and some things didn't materialize, so it is looking to be relatively short agenda, that meeting, but there are certain items coming through that we really should act on, including the cooperative agreement from the county. We are hoping at this point we'll be ready to go at that time, and we're also looking at authorizing payments related to the easements associated with things. Are you guys okay conducting, are there certain things that, like that you're uncomfortable with having the quorum do, that you'd rather have a full council that we should delay for?
Oh, in fact, you
That's
know,
fine.
I would be more than willing to just talk directly with the mayor and but prior to that, and let him know my thoughts on things and go with that.
Works for me.
Totally
And
comfortable
that's
with
the
what
June
these
13th
guys.
meeting?
Yes.
I'm in Canada, that's why, I got a week-long fishing trip, so I
If
don't know.
I will be here, but like I said, my son is leaving in 3 days after that, so
I think we're okay.
that's stuff I need to do. But if you need me, I will be.
Any further discussion? Any motions to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Schultenberg,
Second.
second by
Are you looking for
Severson.
the second?
I was, all in favor?
All right.